And it's with that backdrop I say good morning to our next guest, and I'm so pleased to have her back on the program. Clare Lopez is the Vice President for Research and Analysis at the Center for Security Policy. She is also a 20-year veteran of the CIA. Clare, good morning. It's nice to talk to you. How are you?
Good morning, Bob. Glad to be with you even on such a tragic morning as this.
It really is exactly that. And Clare, obviously, I invited you to come on the program before things happened yesterday, which was talking about the Christian persecution campaign and trying to protect Christians who are being persecuted in horrible, horrible ways around the world for their faith. But let's address the biggest story in America today, and that is, again, the continuing threat of gun violence and particularly mass shootings down there in Florida. What was, after processing this for 12 hours or so, you've heard more about the shooter, you know a little bit more about how things were handled in the school, and you've also seen the political reactions coming from various sides of the ideological spectrum. So what is your takeaway?
Well, I have to agree with what you said in your lead up to the morning's conversation here. And that is that school security guards have got to be armed. As we know, one of the security guards at this school died, an absolute hero. The athletic coach and security guard doubled both jobs. Actually put himself in front of, defending the kids against the shooter. But he had nothing to defend them with except his own body, and so he died. They have to be armed, and your example of Israel and how that society has had to defend itself is a good example, I think. And it's not just the security guards at the school, but the kids themselves. I heard somebody mention this yesterday. They have fire drills on a regular basis, even though there's not been any major fire in any school in America in forever. But they still do the fire drills. But nobody ever does an active shooter drill, and they need to. It's a reality that this happens, and the kids, the staff, the school, the teachers need to be prepared for it. So arm the security guards, conduct active shooter drills at the school, and then, people have to pay a little more attention to troubled kids like this. We've seen a lot of images now from his social media sites like Instagram, and he was posting, exactly how he was, thinking and feeling about things. He has guns and knives posted at his Instagram site. Mm-hmm. The other thing to watch out for, I think, are the indicators that for a number of years, and dating back a number of years, this was a kid who committed cruelty against animals. We saw the dead frog at his Instagram site. There are reports that he was shooting at chickens. He went after some neighbor's pigs. Those who display wanton animal cruelty, I think that is a sign that there needs to be more attention paid to what is going on with these people. This young man, obviously troubled. He was supposedly reportedly under mental health care. Perhaps had stopped that care and shouldn't have. But a lot of signs, looking back, as always, were there.
Clare Lopez is my guest from the Center for Security Policy. I'll come back to him and the psychological issues you just mentioned in a second, but I want to go back to the handling of the active shooter situation while it's going on. I'm going to disagree with your second point in order to buttress your first one. I have two school-age kids now. They're both in high school, different high schools, by the way, and both of them do have active shooter trainings, practices like fire drills, like you talk about how they lock down, blinds are closed, children are hidden behind heavy objects, doors are locked, etc. They do practice those things, and it's the fact that they did, that schools do, I think, Clare, and certainly not all of them, because you obviously are aware of some that don't. But it's the fact that I'm sure in this particular school they did, which is what the killer used against them. He knew that if he just came in and started shooting, all the doors would lock and he would have a much harder time finding targets. So he pulled the fire alarm to get everybody out into the hallway as if they're going to leave for the fire drill, and that's when he had willing targets. So he used the active shooter training against them. But that buttresses your first point for the need for armed resistance in the schools, whether they be posted at the doors, outside the main office, or patrolling the hallways, whatever the case might be. The presence of some resistant fire is what always ends these types of attacks. The question is, do we want to have that resistant fire or threat of a gun being fired back at the killer instantaneously, or 6 minutes later when the squad cars arrive after all of the damage has been done?
Yeah, I do agree with you. And I'm glad to know that many schools do practice active shooter drills.
Right.
And hopefully more will now after this, if not before. But agreed again. The only thing that stops an active shooter with a gun is a good shooter with a gun. And do we wait, as you say, however many minutes, and it's never going to be fast enough, no matter how good they are. The response time is. It's never going to be fast enough. Do we wait for that, or do we have some people prepared already inside the school, whether it be security guards or teachers with concealed carry permits that are able to take action
Agreed.
in the immediate seconds after an active shooting situation develops.
And I know a lot of people say, well, unless they're a professional, I wouldn't want them being armed. Like a teacher, for example, who just, took 13 hours of training, which is usually what the mandatory requirement is. Now they got their gun and they're on the patrol, and they might increase the standards a little bit. Make them require annual training. Make them go to annual training, not just to shoot at a range, but to actually deal with scenarios that are laid out. I forget what they're called, the practice scenarios of an active shooter.
Right.
Make them go through these things so that they are indeed well prepared to handle the unlikely event. And we have to remember, as frequent as these things have been, there are thousands and thousands of schools in America, and it is a tiny, tiny, minuscule number of them that have been hit, by active shooting scenarios. But to prepare for that potential situation or that eventuality, give them more training. But certainly, staff members or hired professional guards should be on duty. Claire, let's just briefly go back to the profile, psychological issue of this person, because you're right. There were all kinds of signs. Students have said, we joked that he might be a school shooter someday because he was such a violently tendencied kid. And then you look at all of those things you talked about. Psychologists have known for a long time about if a child is cruel to animals, tortures or kills them, they run a very, very high risk of potentially being a violent person toward humans in their adult lives. Jeffrey Dahmer is maybe the most famous example of that. But here's the question, Claire. How does law enforcement handle this just because somebody has shown those signs? If they haven't committed the crime against a person, they can say, we're watching you, but they can't arrest them. They can't take them into custody for something they might do based on tendencies or past psychological examples of other people. They actually have to wait until they try to commit the crime in order to try to stop them, correct?
I mean, unfortunately, yes, as far as law enforcement goes, but that's why the others in this scenario need to be better prepared. We talked about the schools and making them harder targets, making those inside of schools harder targets, but then also to increase education for those in the civilian population, so that families and friends and the kids, that know people like this, are more alert to warning signs that are not just about some weird kid. Okay, he's the weird kid in the class, but rather this could be dangerous. This is going in the wrong direction. For instance, those Instagram postings, which show weapons, knives, guns, and of course the dead frog and more. Mm-hmm. That means that the kids who are the most likely to be seeing those things, or family members. Now, unfortunately, this young man lost both of his parents in the recent past, but the kids around him, his friends, or if he didn't have friends, at least those watching his accounts, his social media accounts, that they would be alert to the signs that things are not just weird, but actually moving towards dangerous. And you know, that is what we have to do, because no, you're right. Law enforcement cannot step in and simply arrest somebody because they show tendencies. Of course
Right.
not.
And the truth of the matter is they can't even just monitor them 24/7. I mean, we don't have the manpower to do that. That would be like trying to find an FBI agent for every potential ISIS threat in all 50 states. We found out there's over 1,000, you know, we've long known there's over 1,000, James Comey once told us, different ISIS groups, cells, or individuals spread out through all 50 states. We don't have the manpower of the FBI to monitor all of them 24/7. We certainly don't have the police manpower to follow every kid like this. Who may be a threat to somebody and make sure that we're in his hip pocket everywhere he goes. It just doesn't work that way, and that's why these threats will always exist, and they will never be able to be stopped. But what we can do is limit the damage with the armed guards, and I'm glad we agree on that. Claire, I want to talk about saving persecuted Christians, a very important movement that you and your colleague and the founder and president of Center for Security Policy, Frank Gaffney, are supportive of, but I'm going to ask you to hold on with me just a moment here while we check our traffic before you tell us all about it. Stand with persecuted Christians. Okay. Clare Lopez, right back with us after this. All right, it is 10:24. The Bob Frantz Authority continues on AM 1420, The Answer, with my guest, Clare Lopez, Vice President of Research and Analysis at the Center for Security Policy. We're going to take a little break here from the conversation about the mass shootings in this country and the best way to protect students from these atrocities, to talk about the best way to protect persecuted Christians around the globe. The STPC campaign was launched yesterday, Save the Persecuted Christians. Frank Gaffney, president of the Center for Security Policy, Claire, and your colleague, highlighting this, as well as you. I learned of it from you on Twitter. What can you tell us about this campaign, Claire?
Well, thanks for mentioning it, Bob. Save the Persecuted Christians is a kind of an informal coalition of partners, including faith leaders, pastors, ministers, rabbis, leaders of faith communities around the country, who have come together to try to draw attention to the worldwide discrimination and persecution and slaughter, quite frankly, that Christians face in many places around the world simply because of their faith, their Christian faith. And so what the coalition members are trying to do is first of all, to call attention to what's going on, to inform about what is happening to Christians around the world, and then also to encourage others to become more engaged. One of the ways that people can do this, to become engaged, is to hang a poster, a banner that's been created for this campaign at their place of worship. They can find the banner at www.savethepersecutedchristians.org, along with more information about the campaign. But what the banner says, essentially, is just simply Save the Persecuted Christians. With that website, savethepersecutedchristians.org, and a symbol on the banner, the letter N, or Nun, in Arabic, the Arabic letter. And the reason they put that on the banner is because it is that Arabic letter Nun that was spray painted by the Islamic State, the Islamic jihadis that took over so much territory in what used to be called Iraq and the former Syria. They spray painted that letter on the homes of Christians to make them targets for assault and attack and murder. So again, savethepersecutedchristians.org, and thanks very much, Bob, for letting us talk about
No,
this.
it is my pleasure. That's why I reached out to you as soon as I read your tweet about it and then clicked onto that website you're talking about right now and took a look at it to see what it's all about. It's extraordinarily important, and I want to continue, and I'll retweet it and post it on my own Facebook as well so that people can find a way to get that banner. I think it's a great idea. Since you brought up the Islamic State, and let me kind of get you a quick question before we're done about the state of things, particularly right now in Syria. I had Ryan Morrow on the program yesterday from the Clarion Project, another man who does great work highlighting this stuff the way you do. and we talked about the American-led coalition bombings that killed several Russians, what I guess we might call mercenaries, but Ryan says are actually, members of the Russian military. But they're there in support of Assad. Iran is still in support of Assad, and Turkey is now, of course, essentially waging a de facto war against the United States as well. Can you tell us what the state of the Islamic State in Syria is and our role in all of that?
Well,
it's a loaded question for a minute and a half. I apologize, but
so it's okay. After 7 years of horrific warfare and simply mounting casualties, well over 500,000 dead now, the war in this region is just becoming more complicated. The Islamic State has been essentially defeated. Its territorial holds, the territory that it formerly held, has been reduced down to a small amount, a fraction of what they used to hold. It doesn't mean the threat is done, though, because those jihadis are not all foreigners. They're not all going home somewhere else. They come from the region, and they are still there. Many of them are still there. They will reform. They will regroup. They will reemerge as something Sunni and jihadi if we don't do something about it. In the meantime, equally jihadists, the Shiite axis of the Tehran regime, have really benefited from our myopic focus on only going after the Islamic State, because where they were pushed out of is where the Shiites and Iran's axis, which includes Hezbollah and also includes other Shiite militias, they have moved in. And in fact, there's an actual population transfer as well to replace pushed out Sunnis with Shiites. So unfortunately, the war goes on. Great power involvement, including Iran, including Russia, including, yes, Turkey, and the United States, make things only more complicated. Turkey is fighting to keep the Kurdish factions, the militias, the groups, from coalescing into any kind of an organized entity and to keep them well away from their border. But, of course, the United States has worked very closely with Kurdish forces in the fight against the Islamic State, and they are among our closest allies in that fight. So, as you can see, very complicated situation.
And yet we are conspicuously silent, our military and our leaders, including our president, on Turkey's assault on the Kurds, despite the fact that we are allied with them. So that is something that we will keep our eye on, and obviously we will hopefully turn to you for more information and intelligence as the situation develops. And before you go, Clare Lopez from Center for Security Policy, a little birdie tells me that our mutual friend, the one of the chapter co-leaders of Act for America which is Act for Ohio now, of course, Beverly Goldstein is a birthday girl today, so I thought you might like to wish her a happy birthday.
Absolutely. Happy birthday to Bev, and looking ahead to the future meetings of that Cleveland chapter. They're going to have Debbie Anderson on in a week from Sunday, and she's from Minnesota. Dick Manasari from Michigan will be their guest in he was their guest
already. Yeah, he was last month.
Frento, United West from Florida will be their guest in March. So looking ahead to those. But happy birthday, Bev.
Amen. Happy birthday, Bev. And Claire, thank you so much for your time.